Last night, for the first time since COVID, the Australian Prime Minister interrupted every TV and radio station in the country at the 7 p.m. AEDT time. Tonight, just a few hours ago, the U.S. President also did a national address. Both of them were talking about the same thing. And that thing directly affects the price you paid the last time you filled up your car. Australia runs on diesel. Trucks, farms, mines, pretty much everything that physically moves in this country depends on it. Right now, we have about 32 days of supply. That's it. That's what this is about.
Everything in this video is from government data, parliament, and news reporting from the last few days. Sources in the description. Let's get into it.
To understand how we got here, you need to find a stretch of water, 33 kilometers wide, on the other side of the world. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage between Iran and Oman. About 20% of all the oil traded on Earth passes through it every single day. On February 28, 2026, the U.S. and Israel launched military strikes on Iran called Operation Epic Fury. Iran responded by effectively shutting down shipping through the strait. Tankers couldn't get through safely, insurance companies pulled out, freight costs hit historic highs. Australia sits at the end of some of the longest supply chains in the developed world. When that system comes under pressure, we feel it almost immediately. Petrol prices jumped around 50 cents a liter within weeks, from about $1.69 to $2.19 on average nationally. Regional areas got hit harder and faster.
So, what does Australia's situation actually look like? As of late March 2026, 32 days of diesel, 36 days of petrol, 29 days of jet fuel. These are the figures confirmed in Parliament. Those numbers sound manageable. They're not. The International Energy Agency, the body that sets global fuel security standards, requires member countries to hold 90 days of reserves. Australia has been missing that target since 2012. And the fuel type that would actually break things first? It's not the petrol you use to get to work. It's diesel. Diesel doesn't just power Australia, it moves it. The food on your supermarket shelf arrived on a diesel truck. The iron ore in the Pilbara runs on diesel machinery. The grain harvest across regional Australia? Diesel. Every industry that produces something physical in this country depends on it. Running out of petrol is an inconvenience. Running out of diesel is a supply chain collapse. They're genuinely different categories of problem. Internal government modeling found that a 20% reduction in imports could deplete diesel reserves within months. A 40% reduction would get there significantly faster. There's one part of this most coverage hasn't explained, and it makes the whole situation more fragile than the headline numbers suggest. There's a small artificial island near Singapore city center called Jurong Island. It supplies roughly 20% of Australia's refined fuel. Singapore doesn't have a single drop of crude oil of its own. It buys about 2/3 of its supply from the Middle East, and 2 of its 3 refineries have already cut back output. Singapore is effectively where Australia's fuel price gets set. When their output drops, our prices go up. It's that direct a connection. The government has responded, and some of what they've done is significant. In March, they released hundreds of millions of liters from domestic reserves. They relaxed fuel quality standards for 60 days, and from April 1st, the fuel excise was cut in half. On March 30th, National Cabinet agreed to a 4-stage National Fuel Security Plan. We're in Stage 2 right now. Stage 3 is voluntary limits on fuel use. Stage 4 is rationing. Fuel gets redirected to emergency services, hospitals, and critical freight. Everyone else waits. The threshold that triggers rationing? Reportedly around 10 days of supply remaining. The Prime Minister was asked to confirm that figure publicly. He said he didn't want to speculate. Last night, April 1st, the Prime Minister addressed the nation. These addresses are reserved for moments of genuine national crisis. The speech ran 3 minutes. He said the months ahead may not be easy.
My fellow Australians, by nature, we're an optimistic country. The economic shocks caused by this war will be with us for months. The months ahead may not be easy. Thank you and good evening.
Now, here's the part worth paying attention to. The announcement alone sparked a rush on petrol stations before he said a single word. Now, I actually went to a few local servos around the time the address was announced, and I pulled up the Google Maps popular times data. Normally, 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, pretty quiet. This is what it looked like instead. Demand for fuel surged by up to 400% in some parts of the country. Over 100 Victorian service stations ran out of petrol. More than 80 ran out of diesel. 1 in 7 NSW stations had no fuel at all. One political analyst put it this way: people are observing that going to the petrol station is now like a scene from Mad Max. The reaction online was pretty uniform. People felt the speech was light on detail. Some were reassured by the calm. A lot of people wanted more. Few comments that summed it up. Half expected him to say April Fools at the end. The circumstances are 100% much worse than they're letting on. I actually thought he was going to give every Australian free electric cars. 2021, work from home. 2026, walk from home. The internet was never going to let that slide. But underneath all of it, the fact that it happened at all tells you something. These addresses aren't normal. Not a press conference, not a tweet, every channel, simultaneously. The last time that happened was a pandemic. And then, a few hours later, on the other side of the world, Trump addressed his nation too. He said U.S. strikes on Iran will intensify over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Then, he said something that matters for Australia. On the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that 20% of the world's oil flows through, Trump said, the U.S. doesn't need it, won't be involved. Other countries can handle it themselves. On social media, he wrote, "Go get your own oil." He suggested countries buy oil from the U.S. instead. European stocks up over 2%. Wall Street up. Oil sitting at about $106 a barrel. Markets are rising, which suggests investors think this wraps up soon. Weeks, not months. Maybe they're right. But oil at 106 isn't resolved. And Australia's fuel supply depends on a strait the U.S. just said isn't their problem. None of this appeared suddenly. It's the result of decisions made over time. Each one, at the time, made sense. In 2005, Australia had 8 oil refineries. Today, 2. One in Brisbane, one in Geelong. Together, they cover just 15 to 20% of what Australia uses. The other 80+% comes from Asian refineries, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, China. And those refineries run on crude oil that mostly flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So when the strait is disrupted, it doesn't just affect oil getting to Australia. It affects the people who make Australia's fuel. A supply chain built on another supply chain, both exposed at the same time. A Senate inquiry in 2014 looked at this. It concluded supply chains were reliable, diversified. We'd be fine. That was 12 years ago. Australia also used to run its own fuel tankers, Australian ships, Australian crews. The last one left service in 2016. Now, almost every liter of fuel in your car arrives on a foreign vessel. So where does that leave us? Markets think this wraps up in weeks. Trump says the mission is nearly done. The government says supply is secure until mid-April. Maybe all of that is right. But Australia's fuel security doesn't depend on what they think. It depends on whether oil keeps moving through a strait that, as of tonight, isn't their problem anymore. 32 days of diesel. That's the buffer. That's the line. And tonight, both the Australian Prime Minister
And the U.S. president addressed their nations about it. That's probably worth understanding.
One more thing before you go. This one's about your wallet. The government just cut fuel excise by 26 cents a liter. Sounds simple, but some economists warn it might actually make things worse. If you want to know why, that's the next video.